For a long time, economics pretended that people were better than they are. Rational, consistent, calm. A species of calculators moving smoothly through markets, guided by incentives and information. It was a beautiful fiction, and a fragile one. Welcome to another scene from the book, The History of Economics in 25 Scenes. Today I'll tell you about behavioural and institutional economics, the moment when the discipline finally admits that humans are not equations. By the late 20th century, cracks had become impossible to ignore. Real people kept breaking the models. They saved when theory said they should spend. They panicked when numbers said they were safe. They followed habits, copycats, stories, and instincts that no curve could explain. Markets moved not just on prices, but on moods. Fear traveled faster than information. Confidence collapsed without warning. At the same time, economists began to notice something else they had long taken for granted: institutions. Laws, norms, customs, trust, reputation. The invisible scaffolding that makes exchange possible at all. Markets did not float freely in space. They were embedded in societies, histories, and power structures. Behavioural economics turned inward, toward the mind. Institutional economics turned outward, toward the rules of the game. Together, they delivered the same message from opposite directions. The economy is not abstract. It is human, situated, and deeply imperfect. This was not a refinement of old theory, it was a change of posture. Economics stopped asking how people should behave and began asking why they behave the way they do. After a century obsessed with clean equations and elegant models, economics ran into an awkward problem. People. Real ones, emotional ones, inconsistent ones. The old hero of theory, Homo economicus, was a tidy creature, calm, logical, endlessly calculating. He always knew what he wanted and always chose what maximized it. Very convenient. Also imaginary. Real human beings live by stories, not spreadsheets. They follow habits, copy others, fear loss more than they desire gain, and look for meaning as much as money. When that myth finally collapsed, economics had no choice but to invite humanity back onto its own stage. That is where behavioural and institutional economics enter the scene. From one side, behavioural economics walks into the human mind, asking why people decide the way they do. It studies bias, perception, shortcuts, and error. Not mistakes as noise, but as structure. From the other side, institutional economics looks outward, at the rules of the game: laws, customs, trust, reputation. The invisible scaffolding that makes any market possible at all. One asks why choices feel natural, the other asks when those choices even make sense. Together, they share a quiet but radical ambition: to make economics real again. Instead of assuming harmony, they observe conflict. Instead of abstract agents, they study citizens, workers, and consumers shaped by memory and power. The economy stops being a machine and starts looking like a moral and cultural system. A story humans tell about how they live together. This return of the human does not simplify economics, it complicates it. But it also makes it honest. Behind every price and every crisis, there is emotion, belief, and influence. In rediscovering that imperfect creature at its center, economics recovers something it had misplaced for a long time: a pulse. In 1979, two psychologists quietly walked into economics and rearranged the furniture. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky did not attack the discipline head-on. They simply observed people, and what they found was inconvenient. Humans do not weigh risk with logic. They feel it. A loss hurts roughly twice as much as a gain feels good. Regret bites harder than reward comforts. We do not calculate probabilities, we tell ourselves stories about them. From this insight emerged behavioral economics. It studies the mental shortcuts that make everyday life possible and systematic error inevitable. Anchoring ties our judgment to numbers that should not matter. Availability makes rare events feel common if they are vivid or recent. Confirmation bias quietly edits reality so that it agrees with what we already believe. These are not glitches in rationality, they are how the mind works. Richard Thaler took these ideas out of the laboratory and into public life. His idea of nudging was disarmingly modest. If people are predictably imperfect, then small changes in context can change behavior. Automatic pension enrollment, healthier food placed at eye level, messages framed as encouragement rather than warning. No coercion, no command, just design that respects human weakness. Behavioral economics did something radical by doing something simple. It replaced the fantasy of the cold, rational actor with a warmer, fallible human being trying to cope with uncertainty. Emotion returned to the model. Error became predictable, and economics recovered a forgotten truth: that choice is not a calculation performed by a machine, but a drama played out inside the mind. Long before anyone spoke of behavioral economics, Thorstein Veblen had already sensed that markets are social stages. At the turn of the 20th century, he noticed something awkward. People do not consume only to survive, they consume to be seen. Buying becomes performance. A suit, a house, a holiday quietly announces status and belonging. The market, in Veblen's eyes, is not just about need, but about recognition. A theatre where identity is rehearsed through spending. A century later, Douglas North gave this insight a deeper structure. He argued that markets do not float in a vacuum of prices and rational choices. They live inside frameworks of law, culture, and trust. These frameworks are institutions, the rules of the game. They define property, enforce contracts, and signal what behavior will be rewarded or punished. Without them, the market is not free but feral, a scramble where self-interest destroys cooperation. For North, institutions were not just offices or regulations. They were habits of coordination, the invisible architecture that makes exchange possible. Where institutions are inclusive, fair, predictable, open, societies innovate and grow. Where they are extractive, closed, corrupt, unequal, effort withers and talent flees. In this view, growth depends less on machines or capital than on confidence. The belief that promises will be kept, that rules apply to everyone, that tomorrow will not betray today. Trust becomes an economic resource, as real as steel and far harder to replace once broken. Institutional economics returned a missing truth to the discipline. Prosperity is not born from competition alone. It rests on shared rules and collective faith, the quiet agreement that cooperation is still worth the risk. At first glance, behavioral and institutional economics seem to live in different worlds. One looks inward, into the mind. The other looks outward, into society. But beneath those differences runs a shared discovery. The economy is not a machine. It is a relationship. Behavioral economics listens closely to how people actually decide. It follows hesitation, bias, fear, and hope. It notices how risk feels heavier than reward, how losses linger longer than gains, how choices are shaped by stories as much as by numbers. Its world is intimate. The pause before buying, the anxiety of uncertainty, the quiet logic of emotion. Institutional economics steps back and asks a different question. Under what rules do those imperfect decisions still manage to connect? It studies law, norms, customs, and trust, the external structures that allow cooperation to survive even when reason fails. Contracts matter not because they are perfect, but because people believe they will be honored. Together, these two approaches reveal the same truth from opposite sides. Rationality is never absolute. It lives inside limits of perception, culture, and credibility. The so-called invisible hand works only because people trust the rules that guide it, and that trust must be earned again and again. In this light, economics changes its object. It is no longer the geometry of supply and demand. It becomes the anthropology of coordination, the study of how fragile emotional beings still manage to trade, plan, and live together. Equilibrium, once imagined as a mathematical balance, now looks like a moral one. A delicate alignment between emotion and structure, freedom and responsibility. When that balance breaks, no formula can repair it. Only the slow, human work of rebuilding trust can. Out of the behavioural and institutional turn came a new kind of economics, empirical, experimental, and openly human. Economists left their armchairs and entered laboratories, classrooms, even brain scanners. They watched decisions being made in real time. Neuroeconomics traced the chemistry of risk and reward. Happiness economics discovered, sometimes awkwardly, that well-being refuses to fit neatly into income charts. The models grew messier, yes, but also more alive. Across these fields, one conclusion quietly overturned everything that before. Humanity is not the error in the equation. Humanity is the equation. The task is no longer to discipline people until they behave like perfect, rational agents, but to design systems resilient enough to live with bias, emotion, and memory. Policy, institutions, and technology must bend to human nature, not pretend to rise above it. After 2 centuries of abstraction, economics returns to its original soil, moral and psychological. It rediscovers the human being not as a variable, but as a storyteller. Prices and profits are only surface signals. Beneath them move fear, recognition, belonging, hope. In this moment, Adam Smith quietly returns. In the theory of moral sentiments, he wondered whether reason could ever outrun emotion. 2.5 centuries later, the question still has no final answer, but now it defines the age. Economics finally accepts what humanity always knew. Reason and emotion are not enemies. They are partners, endlessly negotiating how to live wisely in a world of numbers. Economics set out to explain markets and ended up confronting humanity. What began as a science of prices became an inquiry into fear, trust, habit, and hope. The great surprise of modern economics is not that people are irrational, but that cooperation is possible at all. Fragile, learned, and always reversible. The behavioural and institutional turn leaves us with one quiet motto. Markets work only when people believe in them. And belief is not mathematical. It is moral, emotional, and social. Break trust, and no model can save you. Restore it, and even imperfect systems can breathe again. This does not offer comfort. There is no final equilibrium waiting at the end of history. There is only maintenance, of rules, of dignity, of shared meaning. Economics, at its most honest, is no longer a promise of control, but a discipline of attention. Next time, we move further into the present, where algorithms, platforms, and artificial intelligence reshape choice itself. We will ask a dangerous question. If markets now learn faster than humans do, who is really making the decisions? That is the next scene in The History of Economics in 25 Scenes.